Flight attendant kicks out. A black teen boy. The airline loses $3 billion by morning. You need to get off this plane now. The voice was sharp, clipped, and full of manufactured authority. The woman saying it wore a neatly pressed uniform, her hair pulled tight, her badge reflecting the cabin lights. Her name tag read Megan Blythe, but the 16-year-old boy standing in front of her couldn't focus on anything but the silence in the cabin around him. Jalen Carter blinked. I didn't do anything. The flight had just landed in New York. The seatbelt signs had barely switched off, and passengers were beginning to gather their things. But all eyes had now turned toward row 4, where Jalen, a lanky, soft-spoken black teen in a gray hoodie and Nike joggers, stood frozen in the aisle, backpack in hand. Megan didn't repeat herself. Instead, she crossed her arms and gestured to the 2 airport security officers, now boarding the plane from the front. He was in the wrong seat, she called over her shoulder. Refused to comply with multiple instructions. That's not true, Jalen said quietly. His voice cracked not from fear, but disbelief. I showed you my ticket. The man sitting in 4B leaned toward Megan. Actually, I saw him when he boarded. He had the right seat. Megan ignored him. Her focus didn't waver. The guards were next to Jalen now, looming over him with the mechanical sympathy of people used to being obeyed. One reached for his arm. I can walk, Jalen muttered, already stepping toward the exit. Let's go, the taller one said, hand hovering at his side. The cabin was dead quiet. A woman 3 rows back had her phone out, recording. A man whispered, "What happened?" Someone else said, "I think he snuck into first class." And with that, the assumption sealed itself. Jalen didn't argue. He didn't resist. He just walked each step down that aisle like walking through a gauntlet of stairs that didn't know whether to be curious or ashamed. When he passed Megan, he paused, not to threaten, not even to speak, but to meet her eyes. "You're making a mistake," he said. She looked away. As he disappeared into the jet bridge, his phone buzzed once in his pocket. One word from a saved contact. Mom. 2 hours earlier, Jalen had boarded Flight 1883 from Denver to JFK alone. It was early, 6:05 a.m., and the terminal was still yawning itself awake. He moved quietly, carrying just a black backpack and a boarding pass printed the night before. He wore no jewelry, no name-brand flash, just a Howard University hoodie that hung slightly loose on his frame. When he handed his ticket to the gate agent, she paused. "You're in 4A?" she asked, glancing down at the pass. "Yes, ma'am." She scanned it. The green light blinked. Then she hesitated. "You're traveling alone?" "Yes." The agent nodded slowly, her smile fading. "Just go ahead." Inside the plane, Jalen found his seat. The older man next to him in 4B gave him a polite nod, already absorbed in his newspaper. Jalen sat quietly, pulled out his phone, and scrolled through a group chat with his friends from school. He hadn't seen most of them since his mom started relocating for work. She told him this trip would be a test of sorts. He didn't ask what that meant. He figured it was another way of saying, "Be ready." Halfway through the flight, he went to the restroom. Nothing unusual. He waited his turn, returned, and sat down. No disruptions, no confrontation. But Megan had noticed him the moment he boarded. Her eyes followed him like she was waiting for a mistake. She hadn't offered him a drink, skipped him during snack service. When he asked if he could get a water, she raised an eyebrow and said, "We'll come around shortly." They never did. None of that surprised Jalen. He was used to it. The stares, the double takes, the assumptions. But what did surprise him was how fast it escalated once they landed. When the seatbelt sign turned off, he stood, waiting to grab his bag. That's when Megan marched down the aisle like she'd been waiting for a cue. "Excuse me," she said sharply, "you can't block the aisle." "I'm just getting my bag," he replied. You're not in this seat. He held up his ticket. 4A. She barely glanced at it before stepping back and reaching for her intercom. The rest happened fast. Security, the lie, the stairs. Now, in the waiting area near baggage claim, Jalen sat alone. He had no bags, just his phone, buzzing again. Alana Carter, incoming call. He picked up. Jalen? Yeah. What happened? His voice cracked. She said I didn't belong in that seat. There was a pause. And you didn't resist? No. Good. Another pause. Go to Terminal D, private exit. Michael will meet you there in 15. Okay. And Jalen? Yeah? You handled it perfectly. She hung up. Alana Carter stood at the top of a marble stairwell inside a private corporate wing of JFK. She wore a tailored charcoal suit, heels that made her seem taller than she already was, and a badge clipped discreetly beneath her blazer with the emblem of Eastbridge Holdings, a firm that quietly managed billions in global infrastructure investment. Today, she wasn't there for business. She was there for her son. The phone on her assistant's desk buzzed. Ma'am, he said, the board from Atlantic Jet is asking if you'll join the investor call. Alana raised an eyebrow. They're requesting clarification about the complaint filed this morning and the freeze notice you triggered. She nodded once. Tell them I'll join in 30. Yes, ma'am. She looked out across the tarmac, where another jet was beginning its taxi toward the runway. They didn't know yet. Not the CEO, not the PR team already drafting their neutral-toned apology, not even Megan Blythe probably reviewing her schedule for the next flight. But by morning, they would. Because the boy they kicked off that plane was the reason the airline would lose $3 billion, and no one would see it coming. Jalen sat in the back seat of a black SUV that moved with quiet purpose through the restricted lane outside Terminal D. His face was calm, but his fingers tapped anxiously against the edge of his phone. The vehicle's driver didn't speak. He didn't need to. His name tag read Michael Rowan, and he was more than a chauffeur. He was the Carter family's head of personal logistics. And this morning he was on a different kind of assignment. As they exited the terminal's private access road, Michael glanced in the rearview mirror. You did the right thing, kid. Jalen didn't answer right away. It didn't feel like it. Michael offered a small nod. That's usually how it works when you stay calm while they're loud. The silence returned, broken only when Jalen's phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a call. It was an alert from a group chat with his classmates from Denver. Someone had shared a video link. He clicked it. There he was. Grainy footage from a window seat 3 rows back. Megan's voice clipped and loud. His own figure, tall, quiet, backpack over one shoulder. The guards gripping his arm. A woman in the video whispered, "What did he even do?" Underneath the video, the comments had already started piling up. Unbelievable. How do you drag a teenager out without even checking? He didn't even raise his voice. By the time they reached the Midtown office building, the video had hit 4,000 views. Alana was waiting in the conference suite of Eastbridge Holdings. The glass walls gave her a perfect view of the Manhattan skyline, but she wasn't looking at that. She stood with arms folded, her phone pressed to her ear, voice cool and even. Begin with the capital freeze, tied directly to the ethics clause under subsection 14B, and flag the operational partner we spoke about. No advance notice. She looked up as Jalen walked in. Her voice softened just slightly. I'll call you back in 5. She hung up, stepped forward, and gave her son a quiet once-over, checking, not just with her eyes, but with a mother's intuition. You okay? I think so. You sure? Jalen hesitated, then gave a small nod. I didn't lose it, even when they grabbed me. Alana's jaw tightened slightly. That's more than some men 3 times your age could have done. He sat down across from her. I just don't get it. Why'd she pick me? You know why. He looked away. I never thought it would actually happen. Like, I've seen the videos. But I didn't expect it to be me. Alana knelt beside him now, eye level. That's the most dangerous lie they sell us, that it won't be you, that if you just keep your head down, wear the right clothes, speak soft, it'll pass you over. Doesn't matter what you wear, Jalen said, almost to himself. I wore the hoodie because you told me to blend in, she raised an eyebrow. And you did. You blended in so well they thought you didn't belong. Her phone buzzed again. She didn't check it. Instead, she stood and walked to the table, where a sleek silver case sat unopened. She entered a fingerprint code, then pulled out a thin folder labeled Confidential. Client veto rights, Atlantic Jet merger. Jalen glanced up. What's that? My signature clause, she replied. Atlantic Jet is 2 days away from finalizing a $6 billion merger with Viridian Aerospace, and I have the authority to freeze the transaction. He stared at her. Wait, you mean that Airline? Alana turned to face him. The one that put their hands on my son. There was a soft knock at the door. Michael stepped in holding a laptop and a remote. Ma'am, you should see this. He turned the screen toward them. The same video of Jalen's removal was now being discussed by a morning talk show panel. This is going viral, said the host. There's no incident, no altercation, and yet they dragged a black teenager out of first class with no explanation. The clip cut to another host. The kid looks calm. He wasn't even being disruptive. Back in the room, Alana picked up the remote and muted the feed. They thought they could erase you with silence, she said, looking at Jalen. But now your silence is louder than anything they can say. Across town, in the boardroom of Atlantic Jet's headquarters, the atmosphere was starting to shift. A middle-aged man in a pinstripe suit paced in front of a conference table. His name was Brent Ackerman, Senior Vice President of Strategic Partnerships. And at this moment he was looking at a red headline scrolling across his Bloomberg terminal. Teen ejected from flight. Viral outrage targets airlines' discrimination practices. The room full of executives watched in uncomfortable silence as a compliance officer entered, holding a printout. Brent, we've got a problem. Eastbridge just triggered a hold on our merger funds, effective immediately. Ackerman froze. Wait, what? Why? She cited breach of ethics. Internal Conduct Review, Section 14B clause. His jaw tightened. That clause was just a formality. The officer shrugged. It's not anymore. What's this about? Asked one of the board members, adjusting his glasses. Ackerman didn't answer. Instead, he turned toward the glass wall of the boardroom and stared at the city below. His reflection looked different now, smaller. In that moment, he knew. This wasn't about a viral video anymore. It was about someone who had the power to stop everything, and had every reason to. Back at Eastbridge, Alana scrolled through the emails flooding her inbox. Legal alerts, shareholder pings, early investor pressure. Then she paused on one email with a single line of text from a senior Eastbridge partner. Do you want to pull the trigger? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked over at Jalen, sitting cross-legged on the couch, watching the video of himself again. Not with pride, not with anger, but with quiet exhaustion. She clicked reply. Let them sweat. Then she stood, turned to her assistant, and said simply, Call PR. No statements. No interviews. Michael blinked. Nothing at all? Alana nodded. We don't need noise. She glanced back at her son. Silence will do just fine. The first public apology came at 10:47 a.m. Pacific Time, hastily typed and posted from Atlantic Jet's official Twitter account. We are aware of the video circulating involving a young passenger removed from flight AJ742. We are conducting an internal review and remain committed to inclusive service standards. Beneath the post, the comments exploded. This isn't a review moment. This is racism. Say his name. Where's the apology to the teen you dragged off that plane? By 11:30 a.m., 3 major media outlets had picked up the story. Cable news anchors speculated on whether the airline had violated its own policy. Atlantic Jet's stock slid 3% in the morning session. Their PR department scrambled to contain the fallout. But inside Eastbridge Holdings, Alana Carter wasn't watching the markets. She was preparing her move. Her office was unusually quiet for a Thursday. Her assistant, Priya, had just handed her a summary from legal. The video, coupled with the unethical removal of a verified first-class minor, could constitute a breach of fiduciary compliance. That opened the door for a full-stop freeze. Alana stared at the document, but her thoughts drifted to Jalen. She could still see the look on his face when he walked out of that terminal. Quiet, confused, humiliated. He had done everything right. Dressed neatly, spoke respectfully, followed instructions. And it didn't matter. That was the problem. Michael appeared in the doorway. They're calling again. Ackerman from Atlantic Jet. Wants 5 minutes. Alana didn't look up. Tell him 5 minutes turned into 5 billion. Michael blinked. You're not going to speak with them? I will, she said evenly. Just not yet. She turned her screen around, showing the internal compliance portal. A draft was already open. Title, Initiate Stakeholder Freeze, Clause 14, B Authority. Michael read the screen, his voice lower now. You're really doing it? Alana nodded. Time's up. Across town, inside Atlantic Jet's headquarters, chaos was beginning to bloom. Brent Ackerman stood in front of the boardroom whiteboard, where 2 words had been circled in red, asset lock. We need to contact Genesis Financial. Reassure them this is under control, he said, pacing. If Eastbridge pulls the clause, this merger dies. Have we confirmed the identity of the woman involved? Asked another executive. Ackerman's throat tightened. He hadn't told them yet. He hadn't said that the teen removed from the plane wasn't just a random kid, that he was the son of the very woman holding the pen to their $6 billion deal. He hadn't said that because part of him still hoped it wasn't true. Just then, his phone rang. A private line. He picked up. Brent Ackerman, he said quickly. Brent, it's Alana Carter. He froze. Ms. Carter, Thank you for taking the call. I wanted to express my deepest... Don't. Her voice was low, calm. Don't express anything yet. He swallowed hard. I understand. We're launching a full internal review. We'd like to extend an invitation for you and your team to meet with us in person. Discuss this. Resolve it quietly. That's not how this works, she said. He hesitated. I know your son was involved. You don't know anything yet, she cut in. You're still treating this like a crisis. I'm treating it like a case study. There was a long pause. What would it take to undo the freeze? He asked finally. Alana leaned back in her chair. You think you can fix this with a gift card and a voucher, she said, her voice still calm. What you don't understand, Brent, is that you didn't just mishandle a passenger. You mishandled someone's son. And worse, your people never thought twice about it. He tried to recover. We've suspended the flight attendant. She's on leave pending investigation. And the gate agent, Ackerman blinked. She flagged Jalen's boarding profile, Alana continued. Claimed his ticket didn't match. That's why security was already waiting before the plane even landed. This wasn't spontaneous, it was systemic. His voice dropped. We didn't know. We didn't check who he was. Exactly. Another pause. Is there any version of this where the freeze doesn't go public? There's a version, Alana said, but it doesn't start with what you want. It starts with what you admit. That afternoon, Jalen sat in a quiet private study room at Eastbridge's top floor. His headphones dangled around his neck, but he wasn't listening to music. His mind was still replaying the moment on the plane, the silence of the passengers, the cold stare of the attendant, the pressure on his arms as they pulled him out. Michael stepped in, holding a paper folder. "Hey," he said gently. Jalen glanced up. "We got the flight logs, internal crew notes. They wrote you up before you even got on the plane." Jalen frowned. "How?" "There was a flag on your reservation. Someone at the desk claimed the barcode wasn't reading properly. It wasn't true." "Was it because of my name?" Michael hesitated. "Or your skin, or your seat number. Doesn't really matter which one they used. The intent was there." Jalen's hands clenched into fists. "They didn't even talk to me. Not once. Just decided." Michael sat across from him. "People are watching now," he said. "Not just because of what happened, but because of how you handled it." "I didn't handle anything. I froze." "No," Michael replied. "You didn't fight. You didn't scream. You let them write the story they thought was true. And now the world is rewriting it for them." Jalen didn't respond, but something shifted in his eyes. That night, a second video surfaced, this one clearer. It showed the entire sequence from boarding to removal. Multiple passengers had filmed. Some tried to stop it. One woman could be heard saying, "He's a kid. He's not doing anything." By 7 p.m., the hashtag number Justice for Jalen was trending across the country. And inside Alana's secure portal, the signature line beneath the stakeholder freeze clause turned blue. She clicked Submit, not out of revenge, but because the system had already chosen to forget her son's name. She was going to make sure it remembered. By the time the sun rose over the Atlantic Jet headquarters in New York, the boardroom was already filled with tension so thick it drowned out the sound of incoming emails and buzzing phones. A red banner scrolled across the lower third of every financial network on the wall-mounted screens. Eastbridge Holdings confirms stakeholder freeze on $6 billion merger amid racial profiling allegation. No spin, no softening, just fallout. Inside, Brent Ackerman adjusted his tie for the 5th time in 10 minutes. The legal team was flanked on one side by PR executives, on the other by internal compliance, and not a single one of them looked like they knew what the hell to say next. "We need to go public," said Heather Lynn, head of corporate strategy. "A formal press conference. Admit the mistake. Apologize directly. Use the boy's name." Brent shook his head. "We don't even have permission to use his name publicly. They've said nothing since the clause was activated." "Exactly," she shot back, "which means they're waiting to see how we respond. And right now we're responding like cowards." A young analyst entered the room mid-sentence, eyes wide. "You need to see this." He handed Brent a tablet. On it was a live stream. Jalen Brooks, seated across from a well-known civil rights attorney on a popular morning talk show. His voice was steady, but there was tension under the surface. "I didn't expect anyone to notice," Jalen said on screen. "They made me feel like I didn't belong before I even sat down." The host leaned in. "Did you know your mom was the key stakeholder in this deal?" Jalen hesitated, then gave the faintest shake of his head. "Number I didn't know until after. And honestly, that shouldn't be the reason people care." Brent felt his chest tighten. The boy was media-trained without being coached, calm without being defensive, angry but graceful. "He's shifting the narrative," Heather said softly. "This is bigger than corporate fallout now. It's social." Meanwhile, across the city, Alana watched the same broadcast from a quiet conference suite with her attorney, Adrian Wells. She didn't cry. She didn't smile either. She just watched, wordless. Adrian folded his arms. "He's impressive." "He's brave," Alana corrected. "That's different." The camera cut to commercial. Adrian turned toward her. You know what comes next. Alana nodded. They'll try to flip it, call it a misunderstanding, maybe fire someone low-level, blame training gaps. And we're not going to let them, Adrian replied. At that moment, Priya walked in with a new update. We just received an internal dispatch from Atlantic Jet's legal team. They're requesting a private arbitration meeting. No cameras, no press. Alana didn't blink. Then they know it's real now. At 2 p.m., a black SUV pulled up to a side entrance at Atlantic Jet HQ. Inside it were Alana, Adrian, and a silent assistant holding 2 sealed briefcases. They were escorted upstairs without cameras, without flashes. But someone recorded it from a parking structure nearby and uploaded the footage. It went viral before the elevator reached the 27th floor. By the time Alana sat down across from Brent Ackerman, the clip had racked up 1.2 million views under the title, She's Not Just His Mom, She's the Storm. The room was sleek, cold, minimalist in a way that suggested wealth without warmth. Brent stood as they entered. Miss Carter, thank you for coming. Alana sat without shaking his hand. Let's be clear. I'm not here for a favor. I'm here for a record. Brent swallowed. Of course, we want to fully understand how this situation escalated so quickly. She leaned in. It didn't escalate quickly. It decayed slowly. Over years, you just finally saw the collapse. He didn't respond. Adrian placed a document on the table. Here are the timeline inconsistencies. Boarding pass scanned at 6:41 a.m. Flag added manually at 6:42. The only person with override access at that hour was the gate supervisor, Trent Maxwell. And the flight attendant in question, Alana added, Jessica Rhodes, has 2 prior service complaints, both involving passengers of color. Brent looked blindsided. We weren't aware of those reports. That's not a defense, Adrian said coolly. That's an indictment. Across the table, Brent looked like a man trying to claw his way out of a room with no doors. Alana reached into her bag and pulled out a slim black folder. She opened it, revealing a single-page addendum. Brent leaned in. Effective immediately, Alana read aloud. Eastbridge Holdings has enacted Clause 17, Public Compliance Demand. We are requesting a formal apology by the Airline CEO, a transparent internal audit, and full employee accountability for all involved parties. Brent tried to smile. We're prepared to offer financial settlement. This isn't about money, Alana said flatly. This is about accountability. By evening, internal messages were spreading like wildfire. Executives were being looped into late-night calls. Risk assessment teams were flooded with email. And in a private Slack channel labeled PR Crisis Mode, a new update appeared from the legal team. Settlement rejected. Public response demanded. Stakeholder freeze extended 72 hours. Stock hit $3.1 billion loss. Back in Jalen's room, he sat with his mom in silence. She looked at him carefully, then said, You still want to go back to school tomorrow? He nodded. Yeah. You know some people will stare. I know, he said quietly, but I want them to see me anyway. Alana didn't say anything for a while. She just reached over and took his hand. They didn't see you the first time, she said. Now they'll have no choice. Outside, the city lights flickered like static. The storm had arrived, and it had a name. At 7:14 a.m., the internal feed from Atlantic Jet's executive compliance system pinged red. It wasn't just another incident log or flag request. It was a full-blown escalation protocol. Subject, Jalen Brooks. Initiated by Eastbridge Oversight. Action, External Audit Authorization. The compliance team froze. These weren't standard terms. This wasn't an internal formality. This was the kind of escalation that preceded class action lawsuits, massive board restructuring, and national headlines. In a sleek office 4 floors above, CEO Martin Hanley stood by a tall window overlooking Midtown, the skyline muted by fog. His phone buzzed for the 12th time that hour. This time it was the general counsel. "You need to see this," the voice said flatly. Within minutes, Martin was sitting in the secured conference room, eyes narrowed as footage played across a wall-mounted screen. There it was, Jalen being escorted off the plane, calm, confused, the crew whispering. The flight attendant, Jessica Rhodes, standing back with her arms crossed. Then a second camera angle from the terminal. A customer caught the moment Jalen's mother, Alana Carter, arrived. She wasn't shouting, but the intensity in her eyes as she walked through security told the whole story. She didn't flash a badge, didn't demand anything, the lawyer noted. She asked to speak to a supervisor. She was told to sit down. Martin leaned forward. Did she identify herself? She didn't need to. Within 10 minutes, Eastbridge Systems lit up like a Christmas tree. Across town, at a nondescript Eastbridge Holdings building, Alana was seated in a glass-walled briefing room. The walls were lined with display screens, live financial data, merger projection flows, a direct feed from Genesis' litigation department. Adrian Wells was at her side, but he barely spoke. This wasn't his arena anymore. This was Alana's. At the head of the table was Meredith Long, Executive Director of Strategic Oversight. "Your request has been logged and approved," Meredith said. "We've contacted the DOJ's Civil Rights Division and flagged this as a potential breach of interstate transport equity codes." Alana nodded. "And in parallel," Meredith continued, "we've frozen all movement on the Atlantic Jet-Phoenix merger. No public announcement. No warning. The loss projection from morning trading is already at $3.2 billion. Alana leaned back in her chair. "Good." Meredith paused. "You do understand what this means for you, right? This isn't just leverage. If this goes to full arbitration, you'll be on record. So will Jalen." "I'm not protecting optics anymore," Alana said. "I'm protecting my son. And every other kid who's ever been told they don't belong somewhere just because of how they look." Meanwhile, at the Atlantic Jet Flight Operations Center, the fallout was rolling in. Gate agent Trent Maxwell was escorted to a small side office by a manager with a clenched jaw and no small talk. Inside, HR had already laid out a file. "You manually flagged a first-class boarding pass," the HR rep said. "You did it without supervisor sign-off. You then shared an internal note that included the phrase, 'watch list vibes.'" Trent's face turned crimson. "It wasn't about race. I just thought—" "You thought wrong," the rep said sharply. In the crew lounge, Jessica Rhodes sat across from a panel of executives, her badge on the table. She was visibly shaking but trying to maintain a facade. "I followed protocol," she insisted. "You said, 'He's too twitchy to be up here,'" replied the compliance officer, reading from a transcript. "I was thinking about safety," Jessica said. "You skipped his drink service, denied him a blanket, whispered to another crew member he probably didn't pay full fare. You flagged him before takeoff." Jessica's voice cracked. "He was a kid." "That's right," the officer said. "A kid." At 10:43 a.m., an internal video surfaced from a whistleblower inside Atlantic Jet, an off-duty crew member who had quietly filmed the interaction from a rear seat. The footage showed Jessica speaking to another attendant. "You think he used points? I bet he's just someone's intern. Definitely not elite status." The response, a shrug, and then laughter. The video ended with Jalen being tapped on the shoulder and told to follow the security team. By noon, it had been viewed 5.6 million times. Underneath, the top comment read, "That's what happens when power meets patience." She didn't scream. She documented, and now she's flipping the whole game. Inside Eastbridge, the PR director approached Alana. We're being asked if you'll release a statement, something for the media, just to clarify your intentions. Alana didn't look up from her tablet. Let them stay confused a little longer. Back in the boardroom at Atlantic Jet, CEO Martin Hanley threw the latest report onto the table. We're bleeding, he snapped. The board wants heads. Heather Lynn, who had tried to warn them 2 days earlier, stood silently. Martin turned to the general counsel. What happens if we issue a full apology? Too late for just words. We'd need to make this structural. Terminations, policy rewrites, a full-scale reform announcement. And if we don't? The room was quiet. Then the CFO answered. Then we don't just lose the merger. We lose the trust of a generation. In the back row, a new intern, just a few weeks into her job, looked up from her notepad and whispered to herself. Or maybe, she said softly, we already did. The boardroom at Atlantic Jet's Midtown headquarters had never been so silent. 10 executives sat around a long walnut table, each with a tablet in front of them displaying the same image. Jalen Brooks being escorted from seat 2A by uniformed officers. His eyes were calm, but the tension in his shoulders spoke volumes. Behind him, passengers stared, some whispering, some recording. None intervened. Martin Hanley, the CEO, leaned forward, fingers pressed to his lips, staring at the still frame like it might rearrange itself if he glared hard enough. We've lost $3.4 billion in market value in 2 days, muttered Sandra Kroll, head of strategy. Our call center is drowning in cancellations, and now Eastbridge won't even return our emails. Forget Eastbridge, said Greg Menard, COO. The FAA just contacted us. They want a detailed report on our boarding policies. DOT is sniffing around too. This is bigger than PR, it's systemic. Martin turned to Heather Lynn. You've worked compliance for years. Can we fix this? Heather didn't answer right away. She tapped the screen on her tablet, bringing up a live feed of trending hashtags. Justice for Jalen on Fly While Black. Systemic turbulence. It's not about fixing it anymore, she said. It's about surviving it. Across the city, in a minimalist hotel suite with a sweeping view of the East River, Alana Carter reviewed the latest audit logs on her encrypted tablet. Her son sat across from her on the couch, earbuds in, pretending not to watch her. But his eyes occasionally flicked up from the screen. Jalen hadn't said much since the incident, but today his walls were beginning to crack. Did you really freeze a merger? He asked suddenly. Alana looked up, one eyebrow raised. That's what made you take the earbuds out? He shrugged. It's just kinda wild. I mean, it felt so small when it happened. Like I wasn't even real to them. You were never small, Jay. Her voice was soft, but it hit like stone. They just tried to make you feel that way. There was a pause. Then he asked, Did I do something wrong? Like, maybe I should have said something, stood up. You didn't do anything wrong, she said firmly. You were targeted. They assumed you didn't belong because of how you looked, not what you did. His lip curled a bit. You didn't just shut them down. You made them feel it. Alana met his eyes. I didn't do it to punish them. I did it so the next black kid on a flight doesn't have to wonder if they'll get dragged off for sitting where they paid to sit. Back at Atlantic Jet, the fallout continued. Jessica Rhodes sat in the HR office, her uniform removed, her ID badge surrendered. Across from her, Director of Personnel Integrity, Charles Lang, clicked his pen slowly. We've reviewed every camera angle, every piece of chatter over the headset. You skipped Jalen's towel, his drink, called him twitchy, and flagged him based on nothing but assumption. Jessica's eyes were red. I thought I was being cautious. He looked uneasy. Nervous. Because he was 16 and alone on a business-class flight. Because the gate agent stared at him like he didn't belong before he even boarded. She didn't respond. You didn't follow protocol. You built one on instinct, and that instinct was bias. Jessica looked up, desperate now. I never meant to. That's the problem, Lang cut her off. You didn't mean to, but you still did. Meanwhile, the story had already broken through mainstream media. CNN, MSNBC, even Fox had picked it up. But it was the video that reshaped the entire tone. A silent clip of Jalen being led off the plane, book still in hand, looking more confused than defiant. It wasn't outrage that caught viewers. It was restraint. It was the quiet disbelief on a teenager's face as the system failed him in front of dozens of silent bystanders. At a press room in D.C., a journalist asked, "Is it true that Eastbridge's ethics division has tied the incident to discriminatory boarding practices?" A DOJ representative didn't deny it. "We're looking into federal transport equity codes, and we're considering civil rights implications." Back in the suite, Alana received a message on her secure line. The subject line was blunt. "They want to meet." "Who?" Jalen asked. She turned the screen toward him. "The Atlantic Jet Executive Board." "What are you going to say?" he asked. "I'm not saying anything," she replied. "You are." He blinked. "What? You want to know what real power is, Jay? It's when they expect to speak to someone in charge, and you remind them who actually lived through it." He looked nervous, but beneath it, something flickered. Courage, maybe, or realization. "You think they'll listen to me?" She smiled. "They'll have no choice." At 4:23 p.m., a black town car pulled into Atlantic Jet's private terminal access entrance. Inside, Alana and Jalen stepped out. The receptionist paused, eyes wide, recognizing her from every headline. Inside the boardroom, Martin Hanley stood when they entered. Alana didn't. Jalen did. The room braced itself. And then the kid who was dragged off a flight sat down at the table, looked every one of them in the eye, and said, "Let's talk about why you thought I didn't belong." Jalen had never felt smaller than he did when he walked into that glass-walled conference room on the 25th floor of Atlantic Jet's headquarters. The mahogany table stretched longer than a school bus, and the windows behind the board members framed the skyline like a painting of power. Yet every eye in the room was on him, but he wasn't alone. Alana walked 2 steps behind, not as a shadow, but as silent reinforcement. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The teenager in front of her wasn't the same boy who had been yanked out of 2A. He was someone who had lived through the system's failure and stood back up. Martin Hanley, still wearing the same navy suit from the first press conference, gestured to the seat across from him. "Mr. Brooks," he said carefully, "we appreciate you being here." Jalen sat slowly. "I'm not here for appreciation. I'm here for answers." The silence that followed wasn't tense. It was necessary. A room full of executives, used to controlling the room, were now waiting for a 16-year-old to speak. Jalen leaned forward. "You threw me off a plane for sitting in the seat my mom paid for. You didn't check the ticket. You didn't ask me a question. You just assumed." Sandra Kroll from Strategy cleared her throat. "We deeply regret how the situation unfolded." "Don't," Jalen cut her off, his voice low but steady. "Don't give me a polished sentence. Tell me why I was labeled a problem before I even spoke." No one had an answer. Finally, Greg Menard leaned forward. "Look, we've been reviewing everything. There was a breakdown." "Not a breakdown," Alana said coldly. "A blueprint. This was the system working exactly how it was designed." Jalen nodded. "That flight attendant, Jessica, she didn't see a passenger. She saw someone out of place, and nobody on your team corrected her." He paused, searching their eyes. "You want to know what I was thinking when they pulled me off that flight? I was wondering how long it would take before one of you realized I didn't do anything wrong." Charles Lang from HR looked visibly shaken. "We are prepared to make a formal statement, an apology." "Public," Jalen shook his head. "That's not enough." Martin narrowed his eyes. "What are you asking for exactly?" Alana stepped forward now, finally speaking. "Every employee who approved or failed to question the removal, flag them. Not just for reprimand, but for mandatory retraining. Put it on their record, make it part of your hiring standards, and establish a compliance protocol that doesn't just react to headlines, one that prevents the next Jalen Brooks from being treated like a threat." Jalen added, "You built this culture. Now rebuild it." Martin exhaled. "We're willing to restructure policy. And yes, we're working on an internal overhaul, but public pressure is deserved," Alana interrupted. "You lost $3 billion overnight because the world saw what your silence protects." Sandra shifted uncomfortably. "We're also reviewing external partnerships with training firms, working on a bias accountability framework." "Too slow," Alana said. "I want real numbers," Jalen added. "How many kids like me have been removed, flagged, or ignored for no reason? And I want that report public." Greg Menard leaned back. "That's a serious request." "And so was dragging me down a jet bridge in front of a dozen cameras," Jalen shot back. The room quieted. Martin tapped his fingers on the table, considering. "We'll issue a formal apology, with names. We'll publish our internal investigation and commit to restructuring, starting with the staff on your flight." "Not enough," Alana said again, calm as ever. "You want this behind you, but we're still living it." Another pause. Then Jalen said quietly, "You want to fix this? Make me part of the team that helps." Martin blinked. "You?" "I was your passenger," Jalen replied. "Now let me help you make sure the next one doesn't get profiled because he has a hoodie and brown skin. Create a youth equity council. Put me on it." Martin glanced around the table. There was hesitation, but not resistance. "Done," he finally said. "You'll help design the very system that failed you." Jalen stood. "Then maybe we're finally getting somewhere." He turned to leave, but not before looking at each of them one last time. "Next time you see someone sitting quietly in 2A, maybe don't assume they're in the wrong seat." As the elevator doors closed behind him and Alana, the boardroom sat still, unmoving, not out of defeat, but because they finally realized the kid they underestimated wasn't just the face of their mistake. He was the start of their solution. It was just after 9 a.m. when the statement went live. Atlantic Jet's website had crashed twice before it finally loaded. Not because of a system error, but because millions of people across the country were waiting to see what they'd say, what they'd own, what they'd finally admit. At the very top of the screen was the headline, "We failed Jalen Brooks, and we must do better." The letter, signed by CEO Martin Hanley himself, didn't deflect. It didn't bury the truth in vague language or polished spin. It stated plainly that a 16-year-old black boy was wrongly removed from a flight due to systemic failure, assumptions, and a culture that tolerated both. And it promised more than an apology. It listed reforms, real ones. Bias accountability audits across all domestic and international routes, independent oversight, youth-led policy review councils, public release of staff disciplinary actions related to passenger mistreatment. And one name was mentioned over and over: Jalen Brooks. At a press conference later that afternoon, Martin stood behind a simple podium with no logos or flags, just a single statement printed on the backdrop behind him. "Equity is not optional." His voice trembled once as he read his speech. "We dragged a child off a plane because he didn't look the part, because we made assumptions, because we failed to ask before we judged. That child's name is Jalen Brooks. He should have never had to carry the burden of our blindness. But he did. And now he's holding us accountable, not out of anger, but out of vision. Across the country, in living rooms and break rooms and classrooms, people were watching. And somewhere in Atlanta, Jalen sat quietly in front of his laptop, headphones on, watching it all unfold. He didn't smile right away. Not until his phone lit up with texts from classmates, cousins, even teachers. People saying thank you like he'd cracked something open. Across the terminal at Hartsfield-Jackson, Alana walked beside him toward gate C7. This time there was no whispering, no stares. The staff greeted her with straight posture, genuine tone. At the gate, the same flight attendant from that day, Jessica Hayes, was nowhere to be seen. She had been placed on unpaid leave pending internal review. Word had spread, but this wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. Jalen handed over his boarding pass to the new gate agent. She scanned it and smiled softly. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Brooks," she said. "Your seat in 2A is ready." Alana followed a few steps behind. This time she didn't have to hold her breath. Inside the plane, a quiet settled as Jalen took his seat. Not fear, not discomfort, respect. A few rows behind, a young Latino boy watched him, wide-eyed. Jalen noticed and gave him a small nod. The boy smiled back like he was seeing something important, something possible. Midway through the flight, the co-pilot stepped out and approached their row. She knelt slightly beside Jalen and spoke low. "I have a son your age," she said. "He saw you on the news and asked me if planes were safe for kids like him. I didn't know how to answer. Until today." Jalen didn't say much. He just nodded. "You gave a lot of us a mirror," she added. "Thank you for holding it steady." He looked out the window as the clouds peeled away, the skyline breaking through. And for the first time in days, he didn't feel watched. He felt seen. By morning, stock in Atlantic Jet had dropped a full $3.2 billion in market value, its sharpest single-day fall in 2 decades. But what happened afterward mattered more. Other airlines began issuing internal reviews. Hashtags surged. Youth organizations reached out to Jalen asking if he'd speak. One of them even wanted him to help co-create national training modules for frontline staff across multiple industries. But Jalen wasn't rushing to take the spotlight. He had school the next morning. He still had to finish his English paper. This wasn't about being famous. It was about never having to prove he belonged in his own seat again. Across the country, the story of Jalen Brooks became more than a headline. It became a warning and a blueprint of what happens when silence is broken, when a system is forced to look in the mirror, and when a teenager refuses to sit quietly in the face of injustice. If this story moved you, if it made you think twice, if it reminded you that dignity isn't earned, it's deserved, then help us spread it. Like, comment, subscribe, because here we don't just tell stories, we give power a voice. What moment hit you hardest? Drop it below and tell us where you're watching from. This isn't just content, this is a movement.